This just in tonight, the hip-hop star Shock G has reportedly died. Brooklyn native famous for the Digital Underground hit song The Humpty Dance, Shock G, whose birth...
If you grew up around the early 90s hip-hop scene, you probably remember Shock G as the wild creative force behind Digital Underground, and the man who helped introduce the world to Tupac Shakur. But in this video, we're going to look past the headlines and dig into the real story behind Shock G's final days, what led up to his death, and the truth that many people still don't fully know. Becoming Humpty Hump. Gregory Edward Jacobs came into the world in Brooklyn in 1963. He wasn't a loud kid in a loud city. He was the opposite, quiet, observant, always thinking. Life didn't stay in one place for him for long. His family moved from Brooklyn to Queens, and later, all the way down to Tampa, Florida. Each move changed the rhythm of his life, but one thing stayed the same. Greg was always listening, not just to people, to sounds. He was the kind of kid who would sit at a piano for hours without noticing time passing. He wasn't just playing notes. He was chasing feelings inside the music. He heard patterns everywhere, in church songs, in street noise, even in simple background sounds most people ignore. Music wasn't a hobby for him. It was something deeper, almost like a language he was trying to fully understand. But school didn't really fit him. By the time he was a teenager, he had already started drifting away from it. Not because he wasn't smart, but because his mind was somewhere else. He dropped out of high school, moved around, and took small jobs just to get by. Washing dishes, sleeping on couches, playing music whenever he got the chance. Still, music never left him. Eventually, he went back to finish his GED and studied music more seriously. He learned how sound worked, how structure mattered, how a single note could change the entire feeling of a song. That's when things started to shift. By his mid-20s, Greg moved to Oakland, California. It was a place where music wasn't just entertainment, it was life. Funk, soul, and hip-hop were blending in new ways. And in that environment, Greg started to find his voice. But the truth is, Greg wasn't the type of person who naturally wanted attention. People who knew him described him as calm, thoughtful, and more comfortable behind the scenes. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing sound. He loved artists like George Clinton, Sly Stone, and Stevie Wonder. He studied their music like a student studying sacred texts. He especially admired the wild creativity of P-Funk, the way it mixed humor, chaos, and great musical skill at the same time. Shock G did have a son, and by all accounts, fatherhood was something he took seriously, even if he didn't publicly center it in interviews or media appearances. But Oakland in the late 1980s wasn't looking for quiet musicians experimenting in the background. Hip-hop was changing fast. It was becoming louder, sharper, more aggressive. Artists needed presence, confidence, a certain type of energy. Greg didn't naturally fit that mold. So instead of forcing himself into it, he did something unexpected. He created a character to do it for him. In 1987, Greg teamed up with Jimmy Drite, who the world would later know as Chop Master Jay, and Kenny K, a DJ from Tampa. Together, they formed a group called Digital Underground. Their idea was different from most hip-hop at the time. They wanted live instruments, humor, costumes, and full theatrical performances. Not just music, but a whole experience. Their early work even came together through a small but important moment. A $10,000 loan, backed by Chop Master Jay's father, helped fund their first single. That small act of belief helped open the door to everything that came after. Then things got strange in the best way. In 1989, Greg introduced the world to Humpty Hump. Humpty wasn't just a nickname, it was a full transformation. Big glasses, fake nose, strange walk, a completely different voice and personality. Greg, who was usually quiet in real life, suddenly became loud, funny, exaggerated, and impossible to ignore. Humpty even came with an elaborate backstory. Greg told people he was a separate person, even joking that Humpty had survived a fryer accident at a fast food restaurant. Fans believed it, interviews repeated it. The character became real in the public mind. Then came 1990. The Humpty Dance dropped. The song didn't just perform well, it took over. It climbed the charts, filled dance floors, and became one of the most recognizable hip-hop tracks of its time. Shock G had officially created something unforgettable. The album Sex Packets went platinum. Awards followed. Suddenly, the quiet pianist from Tampa had become one of the most entertaining figures in hip-hop. But behind the humor, there was something deeper happening. Humpty Hump wasn't just a joke character. He was protected. Greg didn't feel fully comfortable being the center of attention. So, he built Humpty to carry that weight for him. On stage, he could disappear behind the mask and let another version of himself handle the spotlight. It worked, maybe too well, because while Humpty became famous, Greg was still there in the background, quietly shaping the music. Around this time, a young teenager named Tupac Shakur joined Digital Underground's orbit. He wasn't famous yet. He was just a hungry kid with a notebook full of ideas. Shock G noticed him immediately. There was something different about him. Energy, confidence, a raw talent that hadn't been shaped yet. So, he gave him a chance. Tupac first appeared on a track called Same Song. That was his first official moment in recorded music. From there, Shock G didn't just feature him, he guided him. He taught him how to structure songs, how to build hooks, how to move in a studio, and how to turn emotion into music that people could feel instantly. Later, he played a major role in Tupac's early career, including work on Tupacalypse Now and production influence on tracks like I Get Around. These were the foundations of what would later become Tupac's legendary career. But fame always has shadows. As hip-hop shifted in the mid-90s toward harder, more aggressive sounds, Digital Underground's playful style started to fade from the mainstream spotlight. The energy of the industry changed. The attention moved elsewhere. At the same time, Shock G was struggling in ways the public couldn't see. The pressure of performance, identity, and constant reinvention started to weigh on him. The lines between Greg and Humpty began to blur. The character that once protected him started to feel harder to step out of. Even the studio, which had once felt like home, began to feel heavy. Years later, he would speak quietly about how difficult that period became, about how creativity and exhaustion started to mix in unhealthy ways, about how the same place that once gave him life began to feel like it was draining him. By the early 2000s, the industry had moved on. Digital Underground was no longer in the spotlight. The hits slowed down, the attention faded. But Greg was still creating, still trying to find meaning in sound. Then came a deeper layer of pain. On September 13th, 1996, Tupac Shakur died after being shot in Las Vegas. The young artist he had mentored, helped shape, and believed in from the beginning was gone. That loss stayed with him. It wasn't just the death of an artist. It was the loss of someone he had helped guide from the beginning, someone he had poured knowledge into, someone he believed still had more to give. And over time, that weight became part of his story too. Gregory Shock G. Jacobs had spent his life building worlds inside music. Sometimes those worlds were funny, sometimes they were powerful, sometimes they carried pain hidden under humor. Humpty Hump made people laugh. Shock G made people dance. But Greg was always the quiet mind behind it all, trying to balance creativity, identity, and the cost of both. But even that quiet mind can get tired from masking every time, even though survival inside an industry that demands more than one version of him at a time. Disappearing. When Shock G slowly faded out of the public eye in the 2000s, there wasn't much noise about it. No big headlines, no deep dive documentaries, no "Where Are They Now" specials on major networks. He didn't get that kind of attention. By then, the character he created, Humpty Hump, felt like a relic from another era. Something tied to the early 90s, a time of colorful outfits, wild beats, and playful hip-hop energy. The culture had moved on, the spotlight had shifted, and just like that, what once felt fresh and exciting was now treated like nostalgia sitting on a dusty shelf. And maybe that was the quiet truth of it all. The disguise had done its job, but once it stopped being useful, it also stopped being enough. In 2004, he released a solo project titled Fear of a Mixed Planet. It wasn't a commercial explosion, but it showed he was still creating, still thinking, still trying to speak through music in his own way. Years later, he worked on a documentary project called Walk With Me in 2009. It gave glimpses into his mind, his journey, and the world he had helped build. He never fully disappeared, not in the literal sense. He still showed up on features here and there. He still picked up the phone for old collaborators. Sometimes he'd call people late at night with half-formed ideas, beats, or thoughts that came out of nowhere. The creative spark was still there, but something else was happening at the same time. The system he had once used to create Humpty Hump, the mask, the character, the separation from self, was no longer working the same way. It wasn't protecting him anymore. It wasn't helping him escape pressure. It was just fading. And as the public presence got quieter, the private struggle grew louder. Throughout the 2000s, Shock G would occasionally reappear in small ways. A guest verse, a tribute post, a short reunion performance with Digital Underground when the timing and finances aligned. Sometimes he would even step back into the Humpty Hump persona on stage. The crowd would laugh, recognize him instantly, and feel that nostalgic energy return for a moment. But after the show, the mask came off again, and life went back to being quiet. People around him tried to stay close. His longtime collaborator Money B remained connected through the years. Chopmaster Jay would check in when he could, even as old business tensions complicated relationships within the group. Family members tried as well, but addiction doesn't respond to effort the way people hope it will. By the late 2000s and into the 2010, Greg Jacobs was carrying more than most people could see from the outside. The man behind Shock G, behind Humpty Hump, was dealing with a version of life that didn't match the legacy people remembered. In 2021, reports later revealed that police in Tampa had responded to incidents involving substance-related issues in the months leading up to his death. Shock G did have a son, and by all accounts, fatherhood was something he took seriously. One case in April was ultimately closed without charges after no further cooperation. By that point, the situation around him was already fragile. 17 days before everything ended, the pattern was already visible to those nearby. Struggles with methamphetamine use had been part of the picture. The mask wasn't just gone. It wasn't needed anymore. There was no stage left to perform on. Just life, unfiltered and difficult. What often gets left out in public tributes is something more uncomfortable. Shock G wasn't hiding because he stopped loving music. He was hiding because the industry had no real space for who he was becoming. A quiet, thoughtful producer. A deeply musical mind shaped by funk, experimentation, and humor. A man in his 50s whose biggest mainstream identity was still tied to a joke character from the early 90s. Humpty Hump had become a nostalgic reference point. His work with Tupac Shakur and other artists had become footnotes in other people's success stories. Even his solo work struggled to find a strong commercial lane. And slowly, that creates a different kind of pressure. By the time April arrived, there was no performance left to give, no character to step into, no tour bus waiting outside. On April 22nd, Gregory Edward Jacobs was found unresponsive in a hotel room in Tampa, Florida. He was 57 years old. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but it was already too late. He was pronounced dead at the scene. His father, Edward Jacobs, confirmed the news publicly later that day. And in that moment, what remained wasn't a stage persona or a music industry figure. It was a father losing a son. A quiet ending to a life that had carried so many layers: artist, producer, performer, innovator, mentor, someone who helped shape hip-hop in ways that didn't always get fully credited in real time. Shock G didn't just create music, he created space. And for artists like Tupac, to find an early platform before the world fully understood their impact. But in the end, what was the reaction of the industry to the fact that he gave his all? The industry reaction. The moment news of Shock G's death broke, the hip-hop world didn't stay quiet. It felt like something had cracked open. Within hours, tributes started pouring in from every direction. Not just fans, but legends. People who had grown up on his sound, worked with him, or were simply shaped by the era he helped create. Chuck D posted, so did Big Daddy Kane. Questlove shared his thoughts. DJ Premier, Busta Rhymes, Jermaine Dupri, CeeLo Green, all of them, people who had crossed paths with Shock G in studios, on stages, or through samples and influence, logged on and tried to find words that fit something this big. But words didn't come easily, because Shock G wasn't just another rapper or producer. He was a bridge between eras, between sounds, between funk and hip-hop, between humor and seriousness, between theatrical performance and real musical craft. Major publications quickly picked up the story. The Los Angeles Times described him as a bridge from P-Funk to Tupac. Esquire highlighted how Digital Underground could fit almost anywhere in the culture because they refused to stay in one box. Even artists who didn't work closely with him felt the loss. MC Hammer, Ice Cube, and Chance the Rapper all added their voices. But underneath the tributes, something else started building quietly. A question. What actually happened to him? And more importantly, what led to it? As soon as the news spread, the internet did what it always does when it doesn't have answers. It started filling the gaps. Rumors appeared almost instantly. Some people suggested fentanyl. Others pointed to contaminated drugs. Others simply guessed, filling the silence with theories because silence feels uncomfortable when someone well-known dies unexpectedly. But the family asked for patience. The coroner asked for time. And for a while, all anyone had was uncertainty. But his funeral added more fuel to the already spiraling internet. On May 1st, Shock G was laid to rest at Allen Temple AME Church in Tampa. The service wasn't small. It wasn't quiet in spirit either. Music filled the room. The Tampa Mass Choir performed Stevie Wonder's As, turning the church into something part celebration, part goodbye. People who had been part of his life, his music, and his journey came together. Money B sat near the front. Mopreme Shakur and Ray Love were there. DJ Premier attended. Even Chuck D joined remotely. The service was coordinated by Atron Gregory, the same manager who had helped bring Tupac into Shock's orbit decades earlier. Weeks later, the truth came out, and it hit harder than most of the rumors. On June 10th, the Hillsborough County Medical Examiner confirmed the cause of death. Shock G died from an accidental overdose. The toxic mix in his system included fentanyl, methamphetamine, and alcohol, not one substance. 3. A combination strong enough to overwhelm the body instantly. It was ruled accidental, but that detail didn't make it easier to understand. What makes Shock G's final chapter so painful is how uncinematic it really was. There was no dramatic final moment, no single defining breakdown. Instead, there was repetition. Experimentation that never fully stopped. For years, he had described his creative process in almost scientific terms. Adjusting, testing, pushing limits. Trying to understand sound, mood, and mental state like a producer adjusting a mix. But over time, that experimentation stopped being just about music. It became personal, private, and increasingly dangerous. After the memorials and official statements, another layer of tension quietly surfaced. In August, the city of Oakland declared Digital Underground Day in honor of Shock G's birthday. It was meant to celebrate his cultural impact and the group he helped build. But the decision wasn't without controversy. Chopmaster Jay, one of the original co-founders of the Digital Underground, was not included in the recognition, not invited, not mentioned in the ceremony. He spoke out publicly, asking a simple question. How do you celebrate a group while leaving out one of its founders? It reopened old tensions about credit, legacy, and ownership. Money B chose to stay quiet. Others stayed distant. And just like that, even in death, the story wasn't fully settled. Because Shock G had always been the one holding things together in life. And without him, everything around the legacy started to pull in different directions. Even with all the conflict and loss, the music never stopped moving. The Humpty Dance kept appearing on the greatest songs lists. Rolling Stone ranked it among hip-hop's most iconic records, placing it in the top 300 of all time. Its influence kept spreading too, not just in hip-hop, but across pop and culture. Samples and references showed up in tracks connected to artists like Justin Timberlake, Spice Girls, and even novelty reinterpretations like Weird Al Yankovic. And in hip-hop itself, his fingerprints never disappeared. His work with Tupac Shakur on songs like I Get Around and So Many Tears remained essential parts of Tupac's legacy. Every time those albums play, his influence is still there. The man behind the mask. Looking back, Shock G's life feels like a long negotiation between identity and performance. Greg Jacobs was the quiet one, the thinker, the pianist, the student of sound, but Humpty Hump was the loud one, the joke, the mask, the character that made people look twice. And for a while, That balance worked. The mask gave him a voice, the voice gave him a career, and the career shaped hip-hop in ways people are still unpacking today. But masks come with a cost, because eventually, people remember the character more than the person underneath it. Greg spent decades inside that tension, and in the end, the industry remembered Humpty first. The hits, the dance, the humor, the nostalgia, but underneath it all was something quieter. A gifted musician who helped shape a generation of sound, and who, in the end, became harder and harder to hear. What the world didn't really take from Shock G, what it never quite bothered to carry forward, was the man himself. Not the character, not the costume. Not the joke that made millions of people laugh in clubs, on TV, and in front of speakers blasting through summer streets. But the real man underneath it all. The quiet architect behind a sound that still shows up today in records being made in 2026 by artists who weren't even born when Sex Packets first dropped. When a young Tupac Shakur came into his world, he didn't treat him like a background extra or just another road hand. He saw something early, something unformed but powerful. And instead of keeping that energy for himself, he opened the door. He gave him space, he gave him structure. And still, for years, his name didn't always come first in the conversation. It's easier for people to remember the explosion than the engineer behind it. And over time, people start to forget there was ever anything underneath them at all. Frankly, beneath it all, Gregory Edward Jacobs was one of the most important creative forces in hip-hop's early expansion into funk, humor, and live instrumentation. He helped shape an era that didn't just chase beats, but personality, texture, performance, risk. And he did it without always standing at the center of the frame. For a long time, he lived inside the very thing he created, the spotlight, the character, the expectations. And then, for a long time after, he lived outside of it, still making music, still producing, still reaching for something that felt like it once did. Outside the studio lights and the stage costumes, Shock G lived a much quieter life than most people would expect, from someone so deeply tied to hip-hop history. Gregory Edward Jacobs wasn't the type to put his personal life on display. Even at the height of fame with Digital Underground, he kept a clear line between what the world saw and what belonged only to him. That separation wasn't about secrecy for attention. It was more about protection. Protection of peace, protection of privacy, protection of the small parts of life that don't survive well under public pressure. Unlike many artists of his era, he didn't build his identity around relationships in the spotlight. He wasn't constantly chasing headlines or turning romance into publicity. Instead, he moved in a way that suggested something more reserved, more thoughtful. People who knew him often described him as warm but grounded, friendly but not performative, someone who could be deeply engaged in conversation, then disappear into his own thoughts without needing to fill the silence. That same personality carried into how he approached love and family. Shock G did have a son, and by all accounts, fatherhood was something he took seriously, even if he didn't publicly center it in interviews or media appearances. He wasn't the type to turn parenting into a brand. He kept that role close to his chest, away from the noise of the industry. Those who were around him during different periods of his life often noted that he could switch gears completely when it came to personal responsibility. The same man who created the wild, theatrical energy of Humpty Hump could also be calm, attentive, and focused when dealing with real-life matters outside music. That contrast is important because it shows a side of him that doesn't always fit the public image. On stage, he was expressive, funny, and unpredictable. Off stage, he tended to be more reflective and private. Romantically, he didn't build a public narrative around relationships. There were no carefully staged celebrity couple moments or constant media exposure tied to his personal life. Instead, his relationships existed mostly outside the frame of fame. That choice wasn't always easy, especially in an industry where visibility often gets confused with value. But for him, it seemed to come from a deeper instinct, an understanding that not everything meaningful needs an audience. At different points in his life, especially as his career shifted and the energy of the industry changed, that private approach to relationships became even more noticeable. While hip-hop culture around him grew more public, more exposed, and more commercially driven, he moved in the opposite direction in his personal world. Smaller circles, fewer public details, more distance from attention. And yet, The emotional weight of his life still showed through in his music, because even when he wasn't speaking directly about relationships, you could hear something human underneath the production, a kind of sensitivity. A sense of humor used to soften deeper feelings, a musical language that often said more than interviews ever did. As time went on and the pressures of life became heavier, maintaining balance between career, personal relationships, and internal struggles became more complicated. Like many artists who spend decades in creative industries, the line between the personal and professional started to blur, not because he wanted it to, but because life has a way of doing that when the pace slows and the spotlight shifts. Still, what stands out most when you look at his relationships and family life isn't drama or spectacle, it's restraint. He didn't turn his private world into entertainment. He didn't use relationships as a platform. He didn't build public narratives around love or family for attention. Instead, he kept those parts of his life as close as he could, even while living in one of the most public-facing industries in the world. That contrast says a lot about him, because the same person who created one of hip-hop's most recognizable alter egos also understood the importance of having a self that wasn't for performance, a version of life that didn't need costumes, stage names, or audience approval. Another thing that stood out about Shock G was how he treated other musicians. He didn't move like someone chasing status. He moved like someone who genuinely loved music and respected anyone else who loved it too. Whether you were already famous or just starting, he met people on the same level. In the studio, he wasn't the kind of producer who tried to control everything. He listened first. He paid attention to how artists sounded, what they were trying to say, and where they felt most comfortable. Then he helped shape that into something stronger. That's why so many artists felt at ease around him. Working with him didn't feel like pressure, it felt like collaboration. His relationship with Digital Underground is the clearest example. The group wasn't built around ego, it was built around chemistry. Everyone brought something different, and Shock G knew how to blend those differences into one sound. He didn't need to dominate the room to lead it. He led by understanding people. With Tupac Shakur, that connection went even deeper. Shock G didn't just see talent, he saw potential that needed guidance. He gave Tupac space to grow, but also structure to build on. He showed him how to turn ideas into songs that could connect with people. And even as Tupac became bigger, that early bond never disappeared. That says a lot about how Shock G handled relationships. He wasn't just there for the moment, he was there for the process. Other artists respected that. People like DJ Premier and Busta Rhymes, who come from different styles and corners of hip-hop, still recognize his influence, not just because of what he made, but because of how he moved within the culture. He didn't compete loudly, he contributed quietly. He was also known for staying connected. Even years after his peak, he would reach out to other musicians, sometimes late at night, with ideas, beats, or just thoughts about music. That showed he wasn't just networking. He was still engaged, still curious, still creating. At the same time, he wasn't heavily involved in public conflicts or industry drama. While others were caught up in rivalries, Shock G mostly stayed focused on the music itself. That helped him maintain respect across different circles. Even when relationships within his own group became complicated over time, there was still a shared recognition of what they had built together. That foundation didn't disappear, even when things got difficult. Because at the center of it all, Shock G related to musicians not as competition, but as collaborators in something bigger. He saw music as a shared space, a place where ideas could move between people, grow, and turn into something new. And that mindset is part of why his influence still lives on, not just in songs, but in the way artists approach working with each other today.